It's my pleasure to introduce David K. Johnston. David K. Johnston is a Pulitzer Prize-winning investigative reporter and best-selling author of The Making of Donald Trump. Johnston teaches at Syracuse University College of Law. He's been a frequent guest on MSNBC, CNN, the BBC, ABC World News Tonight, Democracy Now!, and NPR's Morning Edition. And for all of you House of Cards fans out there, was a consultant on electricity regulation, rare earths, and journalism for the Netflix series. Pretty cool stuff. Johnston, a longtime Trump observer, illuminates the sordid underbelly of the Trump administration in its even worse than you think, what the Trump administration is doing to America. He writes a detailed analysis of the Trump administration's first 100 days. He shows how Trump's policies are affecting ordinary people's jobs, finances, and security, explains the federal agencies charged with carrying out Trump's executive actions, and highlights places where the system can hide what's really going on. The sad part is, at least for us, is that he's been warning about the dangers of Trump for years, and it's all coming true, including his prediction that, as president, Trump's behavior would become increasingly erratic, and it has. Plus, this just in, this book will debut February 4th on the New York Times bestseller list at number 2. Yeah, you heard it here first. Without further ado, please join me in welcoming David K. Johnston to Politics and Prose.
Well, good evening. Thank you for coming. I'm glad to see so many people. And I promise you I'm going to leave you with some hope and positive message, not just the downer stuff that I'm so well known for, okay? Our democracy is in very, very deep trouble. Can you hear me in the back, by the way? Okay. Donald Trump is not the disease. He is the symptom. It's terribly important to understand that he is the symptom, not the disease. And if we're going to fix this and we're going to get this manifestly unqualified criminal out of the White House, we have to do some work. We've got to diagnose the real underlying problem. Now, I've been giving talks like this now since the beginning of last week when the book was published. And the questions I get, particularly last night at the library in Baltimore, where I had an audience about this size, tell me something very important. The same thing that happens on the radio shows I do where people call in. Americans have a pretty good idea of the chaos and the palace intrigues in the Trump White House. Journalists are actually doing a much better job of covering what's going on in the White House than I anticipated, partly because even though Donald Trump is all about loyalty to Donald, there are all sorts of people eager to leak who are in there not as close allies of his, and who want to position themselves for the future with journalists, people whose names you're never going to see in print. That's not the story that matters. It doesn't matter. It's entertaining. It's easy to read. I encourage you, read Michael Wolff's book, not in the least because it verifies what was in the book I was last here to speak about, The Making of Donald Trump. But, you know, I mean, it's a good read. He's an excellent gossip reporter. But that's not what happens that affects your lives, your children's lives. If you're my age, your grandchildren's, and for all I know, maybe there are great-grandchildren on the way at this point. It is important that we understand what the Trump administration is doing. And it's not Donald personally doing this. Donald's a lazy guy. You know, we all know he works about 4 hours a day. He said when he was running, you know, I'm never going to leave the White House. There's so much to do. I'll never leave the White House. I'm never going to see the golf courses. Of course, he spends 1/3 of his time at his properties. It's the people he brought in. And Steve Bannon put it best. Steve Bannon said, I'm a Leninist. That is, I'm someone who wants to destroy the existing order. Many of these people, although they certainly wouldn't put it in these terms, hate the United States of America. They hate it. They hate the fact that there are people of color in this country, that there are people of a different religion in this country, that there are people who are not interested in worshiping the rich and trying to get rich and certainly don't want to be taxed to subsidize the rich. And we need to recognize that. In the same vein, we have a president of the United States who is not a loyal citizen. If you go back after you go home tonight, or sometime in the next few days, go to the internet and look at the email that Rob Goldstone, the PR guy, sent to Donald Trump Jr. It's on the New York Times website, among other places. And you want to read it carefully, because the journalists who wrote about it at the time, who are very good reporters, but they're not investigative reporters, they're politics reporters, did not parse the sentences in there. And the fourth sentence of this email makes it clear that there was an ongoing conspiracy. Collusion is not a crime. I don't care about collusion. I care about conspiracies. There was an ongoing conspiracy between the Kremlin and the Trump administration. It says in the fourth line, and you can check the exact language when you get home, as part of Russia's efforts to help. That's not a, hi, would you like to get together and see if we might do something for you? That's, we're already sleeping together. You want to try something new? Well, Donald Trump has been involved with the Russians back to 1983. He has worked very hard to suppress a lawsuit about a $250 million tax fraud, which he authorized. And in fact, DCReport.org, the nonprofit news service that my friends and I started as a volunteer project, and we're trying to raise money for, DC Report is in court trying to get access to some of the documents in this case that have been sealed, because Trump has been incredibly successful in hiding the record of his conduct. So when Trump came to the White House, the people he brought with him, Michael Flynn, confessed felon, convict, Steve Bannon, a whole bunch of other people, brought with them this team that I call Team Trump. And in the federal agencies, it's not just the incompetent, unqualified, anti to their oath of office cabinet secretaries who matter. It's not just Scott Pruitt, who wants to destroy the EPA, and Betsy DeVos, who's completely unqualified. It's the people that came with them that I call political termites. And they have been loosed into the structure of our government, and they are damaging our government. For example, they have stopped posting notices of worker deaths. About 4,800 people a year die on the job. And some of these are just accidents nobody could have predicted. You could follow the best practices and they're going to happen anyway. But many of them are the result of the fact that, surprise, surprise, while some employers, most employers, try or do a good job, there are some who they just don't care. There are employers who have a record of time after time. They have workers who are unnecessarily maimed or killed. The records of those aren't there anymore. They're not putting them up. They're fighting giving away the statistical information that we need to understand what they're doing. And the Labor Department's actions in this area are far from unique. I asked the federal government, under an agency Trump just took control of, the Consumer Finance Protection Bureau, which has recovered multiples of its budget, for a copy of a receipt. I wanted to see evidence that a huge fine supposedly paid by one of the banks was actually paid. You know, lots of the fines you read about in the newspapers by criminals never get paid. They delayed, they were slow, they got back and sent me a lot of irrelevant stuff, and I said, gee, you know, thanks for all this information that's already on your internet, but I just want proof of payment, a receipt, a notice. You clearly, no one would make, you know, a payment in the hundreds of millions of dollars without having gotten a receipt for it. And they said, well, you'll have to file a Freedom of Information Act request. This is the kind of administration we have. When Donald Trump took the oath of office to faithfully execute the laws and to be loyal to the United States of America, he then got in a motorcade to go to the White House. There's a TV camera, a pool camera, in a truck right in front that looks square down the middle. The presidential limousine, known as the Beast, stopped. And it stopped at a place where the family got out. They spent 2 minutes walking around. And what the cameras didn't tell you was where they stopped. Not one of the television networks mentioned where did they stop. They stopped in front of the Trump International Hotel, whose lease says no federal employee can be involved in that lease. And you know what? We have jointly an employee named Donald J. Trump. He's our employee. Well, the reason he did that was you know, a lot of people who voted for him would be meaningless, even if the camera had panned to show the hotel. But if you're an emissary of the government of Kuwait seeking a favor from Donald Trump, if you're an oil baron or a coal company or anybody else who wants a favor from the Trump administration, you got the message. And that hotel, which Trump had in filings, the Trump organization in filings, had predicted will lose money in its first year, is making money hand over fist. Anybody here in the bar business? Well, they're taking in at the bar $68,000 a night. Cocktails start at $36. Steaks start at $60. They're making money hand over fist because if you want something from the Trump administration, what he made clear is you will pay me tribute. You'll sign up to join Mar-a-Lago where he doubled the admission price. But worse than that are these appointees that they've put in place who are totally unqualified and in many cases enemies of the agencies they represent. Donald Trump's administration is turning America into what the ancient Greeks called a kakistocracy. That is a government of the worst people, the most venal, unqualified, criminal elements around, the worst people. This isn't David Halberstam's the best and the brightest. They may have screwed up, but at least they were qualified and knew what they were doing. These are people who, when they get called to testify, give answers that make it clear they have no business being the manager of the little town I live in western New York, much less running a cabinet agency. What they're doing has not been in the news, and that's part of the message that's going to lead to some hope here. This book tells you what has either not been in the news or been in it glancingly about what they're doing to our government. And that affects your safety, your income, your future. Show of hands, how many people have heard of a trade pact called the RCEP? Almost nobody. Okay, you should really care about this. Donald Trump came into office and killed the Trans-Pacific Partnership. I was one of the most prominent early critics of the Trans-Pacific Partnership. Every TV show I could get on, I wrote columns about it because that partnership had serious flaws. It was written in secret by corporate lobbyists and by lawyers involved in the trade business. It was so secretive that when my Congresswoman, Louise Slaughter, having seen what I wrote, wanted to read what was in there, she goes to an office, it's secretive, she has to turn over her cell phone, she's not allowed a piece of paper or a pencil, she's searched, and then she's let into a room, and I said, well, Louise, can you tell me anything about what you read? And she said, yeah, it's all written in really language that doesn't mean anything to me. And Louise has a PhD in microbiology. It's not that she's not smart, it's written in the language of people in trade, not to be understood by mere mortals. Well, we needed to fix the TPP, but Donald killed it and did nothing to replace it. Nothing. That creates a vacuum, and into that vacuum stepped President Xi. The RCEP is the Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership led by Beijing. It's 15 Pacific Rim countries, not us, just as TPP didn't include China. 15 Pacific Rim countries plus India. Now, when I was in Australia in October to lecture about Trump, about journalism, and the key reason I was brought there about tax policy, I was astonished at what I heard from government officials, journalists, chambermaids, taxi drivers, students, professors. They all the same thing. They were all saying that Australia is going to have to reorient its trade policies towards Beijing because there's no American leadership. And it would be foolish to not get with the program. Now, one of the purposes of the Trans-Pacific Partnership was to contain China. You know, China is very expansionist. That's why they're building in the Spratly Islands these artificial islands and saying you can't fly airplanes over here or run ships through here, especially not military ships. China believes that it's the country of the future, and if you drive on their highways, I've at least been driven on their highways, I got to tell you, they put the Autobahn to shame, which puts our interstates to shame. There are, as I like to say, like the Catholic Church, in terms of their thinking, we're here forever. What is Trump doing? Nothing. Japan signs a trade deal with the European Union last summer in Brussels. Donald Trump is 800 miles to the east in Poland. He's giving a speech where he talks about everyone adored me, you know, it was so wonderful, everybody, how wonderful, how wonderful. That's because the right-wing government of Poland used police to make sure that only Trump supporters, people with that right-wing party, got in, that protesters were kept blocks away, and if you had a TV crew and tried to go shoot the protesters, they stopped, capture the protesters on film. The military and the police stopped you. They wouldn't let you go make images. So while this important trade deal is going down, where's Donald Trump? Well, you put Japan together with Europe and the RCEP, and this is not good for our future. This is very, very bad for our future. Donald has a degree on his office from Penn, an Ivy League school in economics. He was given that degree. And I emphasize the verb given because he always said Mexico is going to pay for the wall. And all thinking people went, how would you make a sovereign nation pay for a wall they don't want? I have a plan. And you remember what his plan was when he came into office? He's going to put a tariff on Mexican goods. It's a guy with an economics degree who doesn't know that a tariff on imported Mexican goods and services mean we pay for the wall through higher prices. The man doesn't know anything. He appoints as his commerce secretary one of the leading vulture capitalists in America, Wilbur Ross, whose specialty is seizing a company that's run out of cash, recapitalizing it. You don't pay the bills you owe. Gee, that's something Donald Trump never heard of. You borrow new money, something Donald Trump certainly has heard of. Then you squeeze the borrowed money out and put it in your own pocket, and you turn the zombie loose until it dies. Wilbur Ross goes with Donald Trump to Riyadh, where Donald Trump praises the Saudis for leading the fight against terrorism. You know who the biggest funders of terrorism in the world are? He attacks Qatar, which is an ally of the U.S. that allows us to have our most important military base there. And Wilbur Ross comes back from this trip. He goes on CNBC, and he says, you know, I got to tell you one thing before I go. The Saudi people love us. They just totally love us. You know, there wasn't a single demonstrator anywhere when we were there. And Becky Quick, the young host, says, Secretary Ross, it's against the law to protest there. They arrest people, they whip them. And he said, well, you say so, I don't know. But I didn't see a single protester. And you know, let me add another thing. When I got ready to leave on my U.S. government plane, my Saudi guards got out these 2 baskets of dates, the most beautiful dates. What a heartfelt gift from these men who'd been assigned. This guy doesn't even know when he's being bribed by a foreign government. So all of this stuff I'm telling you is entertaining and it's sort of fun, but what affects your life is going to be, you want to raise profits in the oil industry and the gas industry and the coal industry? There's a really easy way to do it. And let's be honest, we all use oil and gas. We shouldn't hate ExxonMobil. It makes our cars run. But the way that the Trump administration is cutting regulations, it's just go ahead and pollute. Take the toxic residue from burning coal, and instead of drying it out and putting it in a place where it's unlikely to cause harm, continue to put it into slurries and then toxic ponds next to rivers where we get drinking water. That's not benefiting us. That's simply jacking up the profits of these companies, which, by the way, get paid rates under rate regulation to pay for these costs of cleaning up their mess. Let's go to the student loan industry. You know, the reason I have a college education is college was free in California when I was a teenager and a young man. That's how I got a college education, that and war orphans benefits. And what is the Trump administration doing? We're going to address the student loan problem. So Betsy DeVos brings in, of course, executives from the companies that made the student loans. This is not the hen house being guarded by the fox. This is building a new hen house designed by the fox. And in the book, I go through a bunch of the agencies and tell you, those of you who've read my other books, you know, this isn't dry policy manual stuff. I tell these through the stories of people of what they're doing, what's happening to these folks. And that's the story Americans do not know. That is the story that matters deeply, that we need to get people to understand. Now, Donald Trump is never going to resign absent something totally unexpected or some severe problem. And I certainly hope Donald does not have a stroke or a heart attack or something like that, but it's a possibility. But his ego is never going to let him resign. He will not be moved against by the Republicans under what we know now. They've made their bed with him. They're excusing everything he does. In my state, when we had a governor who by wire transfer sent $4,000 to pay for a hooker here in D.C., the leaders of the state legislature went to Eliot Spitzer and said, if you don't resign, we're going to impeach you, try you, and convict you. And he resigned. You know, I have this vague recollection of Republican leaders talking about their concerns about immorality, especially women, and wanting to make sure we can't have access to things like birth control and other stuff, and talking about family values. So out comes the Wall Street Journal on the Playmate of the Year who got paid $150,000 to not talk, and now the porn star. And trust me, to quote Donald, believe me, there's more like this out there. Where are the moralists about Donald Trump's behavior? And I don't buy the argument, oh, we all know that about him. That's not the point. The point is his conduct is outrageous. Where are the moralists who scream about drugs and say nothing about what I describe in this book and the previous book about Donald's deep entanglement with a major international cocaine trafficker and things he did that make no sense whatsoever unless they were in business together, in which case everything he did makes perfect sense? Where are these people? Where are the ministers? Oh, that's right. I saw Franklin Graham on TV the other day. He said Donald denies it. Well, Eliot Spitzer denied it. Bill Clinton denied it. But more importantly, he goes, Donald is a changed man from 10 years ago. And I thought, well, that's a reasonable question to think. Was I different 10 years ago? And I was. I had less gray hair. Now, what matters is that we get a new Congress. Donald Trump ran for president based on the economic policies, just the economics, not the racism, that was in my trilogy on the American economy. Perfectly legal, free lunch, and the fine print. If you know that Walmart uses your tax dollars to build its stores and GE taxes its workers in Ohio to build factories, you know that because of my work. And it's now widespread in the economy, even if most people have forgotten I'm the guy who brought all that to the fore years ago. Well, I said back in 2012, a year when the average income of the bottom 90% of Americans was lower, adjusted for inflation, was lower than in 1967, the year I graduated from high school. That if you ran for president on the economics in my books, you would win, because it champions the 90%. In fact, it champions basically the 99.5%. And that's what Donald did. And I know he watched me on television because he talked to other people about it who told me about his watching me on television. And Donald Trump said, I'm going to drain the swamp. He comes here and immediately turns it into a federally protected wetland, a paradise for Wall Street. He says in 2015, I have a tax plan here. The best tax experts in America have all been over it. Well, one of the things I am legitimately regarded as an expert on is tax policy. And I called and said, where are the experts? There are no experts. They didn't have anybody. Come April, he's been in office 3 months. He promised day one we're going to have a tax bill. They put out a 100-word tax plan. You know what it was? It was a shopping list for Goldman Sachs clients. And he said, first $50,000, married couple won't pay any taxes. Well, the new law is $24,000, and you lost a lot of deductions. Donald says, I love the police. I love the cops. They're so important. They're so important. So he took away, in the bill he signed, their ability to write off the cost of buying uniforms, dry cleaning them, buying guns, buying bullets. To teachers, he says he loves education. He wants to be the education president. If you're going to get an advanced degree, which will earn you more money and hopefully make you a better teacher, no more deduction for tuition and books to get an advanced degree. This is the anti-education presidency. The questions I'm being asked by people tell me that people don't know that. They are, once again, as during the campaign, so fascinated by what's going on in the White House, they're not paying attention to what matters. And the reason I hope every single one of you reads my books, and if you can't afford the book, it's in the library, go get on the list, is that people need to know this or we will not get change. Citizenship is not something that you can outsource. We've got to do the work ourselves, and you've got to know, and you've got to talk to people. I talked to a labor leader I have great respect for, who's in the room tonight, who I've known for a number of years. And one of the problems that all the labor leaders I speak to face is that a lot of their members believe Donald Trump is helping them. They have no idea the damage he is doing to them because it's not in the news. It's not in the news. Journalism never did a great job of covering government, but 40% of journalism jobs in this country have disappeared since 2000. And as a result of that, the agencies aren't being covered at all. The electricity markets, job safety, diplomacy, all through the government, the military, all of these things are being ravaged by this kakistocracy. You got to do the work. I mean, it's not really hard. You got to spend a couple evenings reading a book. And then you've got to take the stories, mark the book up, write in the margins, make notes, tell other people, have the facts to persuade them to understand what's wrong. Now, the Democrats, who have not paid attention to their knitting for 40 years, while the Republicans have been building bench strength, passing laws to suppress votes, coming up with laws to throw out votes after they're cast, as we saw in Michigan, the Democrats have to run candidates who are viable. I was sent a news clip by a friend of mine, a compilation of a couple of interviews with people who want to run for office as Democrats. And gee, they were young and they were earnest, and this is the kind of person, you know, the future we ought to have running our government. And then they got asked questions by local TV reporters, not exactly the toughest journalists as a class out there. And they immediately fell apart because they didn't know anything. They were just like Donald Trump. They didn't know anything. You've got to find and develop real candidates. People have to get registered to vote. People have to be driven to the polls on Election Day. And if you live in a district like I do, where I think it's overwhelmingly clear that my congressperson will get reelected, well, go to a district where there might be change. Arrange in advance to go there. Drive people to the polls. Don't call people and ask them to go. Go get them. Take them to the polls. That's the only thing that matters at the end of the day, are votes. That's what matters. If we do our jobs as citizens, we become informed, we insist on rational debate about real issues, and we then get people to the polls, we can get a different Congress, we can get rid of this presidency, and we can have a bright future. There's damage that will last forever, but the longer he's in office, the longer he is a clear and present danger to all the world. So please, read my book, get to the actual damage being done, and tell other people. And one last thing. Next time you go to a talk by me, because I'm sure I'll be back with one of my future books, maybe the one I hope to have out next year, which is a whole new tax system that's simple and not, you can't cheat under my system without committing a crime. Bring a young person. Bring a young person. So, thank you. So, if you have questions, if you'd line up at the microphones, and the only rule is you got to ask a question, no speeches, and I'll cut you off and have you get back in line after you've refined it if you don't have a question. So, sir.
Good. I enjoy you on TV every time you're on. I enjoyed you more today.
Where's the question?
Why aren't the Democrats talking the way you're talking every single day?
Well, I think that's the problem of the campaign finance system. After Watergate, and just about everybody here is old enough to remember Watergate, which took, by the way, 26 months with a hostile Congress for Nixon, we passed all these campaign finance laws. We thought they were going to clean up campaign finance. They backfired. They're a complete disaster. They have enhanced the power of what I call the political donor class. And we're going to have to go back and revisit this. And frankly, I think after the experiments in Maine and Arizona, we need public financing. You get a budget to run for office. And I also believe we have to have an absolute prohibition on any favors to elected members of Congress. You can't ride in a corporate jet. You need to go somewhere. We'll pay for it as taxpayers. It'll be cheaper. So, ma'am.
Oh, thank you. Mr. Johnston, you think, and we all think, I think, that we need to get rid of Trump, but what about Pence? Some people say that Pence would be worse.
Okay. We're gonna face a constitutional crisis If the decision is made with a Democratic majority, it won't happen with Republicans, to impeach and convict Donald Trump, and hopefully to do that, to then try him, convict him, and send him to prison, because otherwise he will spend the rest of his life traveling the country fomenting violence and revolution. And if you doubt that, just remember when he would say, beat that guy up, I'll pay your bills. And he's trying to get votes. Imagine when he never knows he's never going to get another vote. If the Russians put Donald Trump in office, made the margin of difference, can their other beneficiary legitimately become president? I don't think so. But a lot of people will scream, that's a coup d'etat. And who would become president? Well, as things stand now, no, Nancy Pelosi. Nancy Pelosi. And so if the Democrats do this, I believe that the Speaker of the House has to say upon taking the oath of office, I am a caretaker. I will not be involved in the election. I will retire from public office at the end of this term. I'm not running, and I'm not going to speak out on the campaign. You can ask any question you want. I'm not talking about it. I'm a caretaker, and I'm Caesar's wife. That's the only way that can possibly work. But it is going to be a very big constitutional crisis of whether or not Pence can be put in office. And, of course, Pence believes that God put him where he is, because, as you can see by looking at him, he would be God's chosen president. Sir.
You said how Trump had connections with cocaine dealers. And
a major international cocaine trafficker, and it's all in court records.
And I think I read he had mob connections, too.
Oh, Donald has been mobbed up.
In the Times.
Yeah.
Why the hell didn't Hillary exploit that? Why didn't the Democrats?
No, she. Well,
and he called her dishonest. It's crazy.
Okay. I'm gonna recommend to you another book, Donna Brazil's book Hacks, which was written by someone I trained to be a journalist, Danelle Morton, who's done this with a number of people, turned their ideas into good books, and it'll explain that basically Hillary Clinton wouldn't listen to advice, insulted people who tried to give her what turned out to be good advice, and she in love and war, there are no rules. And when it turns out that somebody is running a totally different campaign like Trump did, you can't keep doing what you're doing. You got to respond, and she didn't, and she paid the price for it. So, and the Russians helped. Sir,
you talk about us going out and getting your book, and I will get your book. But I'm more concerned about the ignorance of Americans. I mean, it seems to me that we have a crisis of information. And part of the problem is it's not the people in this room who will read books.
It's not the people in this room.
The problem is the people in West Virginia, Pennsylvania.
Oh, it's lots of people in this city, trust me.
And people in this. Well,
there are a bunch of them over there on Capitol Hill.
But we have an information.
So what's the question? I agree.
My question is, if Trump is a symptom of this ignorance.
Right.
I mean,
what do we do about this?
And what do we do about making sure or making it possible for Americans to finally listen to reliable information?
So what do we do about this lack of information? Well, first of all, we essentially don't teach civics anymore. I'll bet most of you had to sit through 7th and 8th grade lectures you may have hated about here is how a bill becomes law. And it's not the sausage-making version. But Americans don't even know their Constitution. I taught third-year law students. I'm not a lawyer, but I taught third-year law students for 8.5 years, and I was just struck by, boy, they've had a whole year of con law 1 and 2, and what they didn't know about the Constitution because they were learning the mechanics of how to be a lawyer, not the legal theory and the principles of it. We need to have an education system that changes. Our education system was designed in the late 19th century to produce drones, and it's done a great job of doing that. And only about 15% of Americans get a really high-quality education, and we need to teach critical thinking skills, which means you can challenge your teacher, something I used to get sent to the principal's office for when I was young, that teaches the theory of why we rule ourselves, why Donald Trump is our employee, not the person who Omarosa says we will all bend our knee to. And Americans really don't know these things. Back in the 50s, there was a bill introduced or a resolution introduced in the Texas legislature calling something communist and getting it denounced. It was the Bill of Rights. So, the ignorance of Americans is not to be underestimated. But yes, we need to develop. That's a long-term problem that we need to address. In the short run, we need to get people to stop watching the car accident on the other side of the freeway that Donald has created, along with his audience, with his entertainment value, with having dancing girls and marching band and fireworks. So, sir, ma'am.
Hi, thanks for coming.
Thank you for coming.
You're so kind. Well, basically, I have concerns because I'm not sure if getting everyone to vote is the silver bullet. And what I mean by that is I'm listening to your great advice saying that everyone should just grab everyone and go vote. But we're in this age where we've got divorce over an already
So your question
struggling
is, what do we
over
need to do
education.
beyond that? What's the question?
We don't necessarily have a great track record of being
Okay.
trustworthy. So what else can we do overcoming the fact that we're kind of set up for not having the right information? People are in echo chambers.
I got it. So first of all, yes, we need to educate people about what the issues are, and that's one of the reasons I want people to read the book. I want to change the level of the conversation. You know, I've walked into blue-collar bars, not dressed like this, in Ohio and Michigan and Pennsylvania and New York, and just sat there. And it's astonishing to me that my business legitimately treats blue-collar workers like they're idiots. You watch a play, and suddenly, and I don't follow sports, but the analysis level of the last scrimmage or the double out is just extraordinary. And these people are not dumb, they're just disconnected from politics. We need, what the survey data shows is that if everybody voted, we wouldn't have all those right-wingers in Congress. We'd have them from certain locations, but we wouldn't have them. We would have a much more economically liberal country. But if you don't get people out to vote, there's exactly zero hope this will change. So our democracy isn't perfect, you know. It's been getting better over time, but right now it's like when Marty Python said, you know, humans make progress, but there were the dark ages. We need to get out of that, and the only way to do that is you got to remove from Congress the people who are being sycophantic about Trump.
What would you recommend to people in terms of being able to understand the difference between opinions and facts? You know that great quote about being entitled
There's a couple
to
of
one,
books.
not the other.
There's a couple of very short, simple books about this. Bruce Bartlett, who's the chairman of the board of DC Report, often called every liberal's favorite Republican, because he's principled, wrote a simple book about it. Little short book you can read about how to differentiate that. And one of the things to tell people about my book, when, you know, like the stuff I said about Donald and the drug trafficking, there's page after page of notes and court in my notes of court documents, a letter he wrote, documentation for it. It isn't, I think this or that. It's, here's what the public record shows. Okay? Sir.
Mr. Johnston, thank you very much for being here and all that you do on the media, especially Democracy Now! Pacifica Network. I follow you there.
Thank you.
My answer would be labor. When we've had great problems in this country, the labor
Well,
is...
what's the question? I'm here to answer questions.
Okay, well then I would ask you, would you think a national strike with labor would help us out?
Yeah, I don't think it can be pulled off. When America was its most prosperous, more than a third of workers were in unions, private sector workers, and 80% of workers benefited. When I was chairman of the newspaper guild in Philadelphia, I was dragooned into that by my peers. I was astonished at all the low-level management people that come to me and say, how are the talks going? And I'd say, why? You're not in the union. And they'd say, yeah, but the union sets our wages. You know, we're low-level management. We're not big execs. We get what you guys get, plus a little extra maybe. And so there's just not enough strength. Only 6% of private production workers are in unions. A better strategy, I think, is comedy on the one side. Some of the indivisible groups that are showing up and the women's groups showing up at congressmen's offices are bringing cupcakes and singing songs and making fun. And a second is shaming people. I'm contemplating shaming Fox News, which used to have me on. And I don't think, I'll say it here very loudly and clearly, I don't believe that Tucker Carlson or Sean Hannity has the courage to have me on for a 15-minute segment that isn't taped in advance so they can edit it. And I don't think they have the courage to have me on at all. Because they're not fair and balanced, but have me on for 15 minutes unedited and we'll see. So let me see, over here, this side, sir.
You've made 3 references to Russia so far. All 3 of them are in the vein of a Cold Warrior. Why is that?
Well, because Vladimir Putin has said in his own writings and his own interviews that democracy is a joke and that he wants to undermine democracy, and he is a clear and present enemy of the United States of America.
That's propaganda.
Well, okay, you think it's propaganda?
I mean, that's Times and Post propaganda.
Well,
Simply.
you think he's our friend? This
I don't
is a man
care.
who financed the campaign of Marine Le Pen, the rightist in France. This is a man who seized the Crimea. Well, sir, we're going
You've left that most important
to
thing.
disagree about that, okay, sir?
So between the heat of the campaign season and now, how would you say Trump's rhetoric has or hasn't evolved in person and on social media, especially Twitter?
I'm not sure I understand the question.
Basically, I don't know, the things he's saying, the message he's
Has his
portraying.
message changed since he became president?
How's it evolved over the past year?
Well, I think Donald has become, over time, more blatantly racist. The S-hole comment is a good example of that. He's become more blatantly racist. But he also is less and less engaged. When we had the government shutdown in 2013, he's Obama's responsibility to get in there and fix it. He didn't fix this one because he doesn't know what to do. And that's the principal change that we've seen, is that over time, Donald in his own mind knows he's not qualified to do this. Even though he thinks he's the superior human being, the genetically superior Donald Trump, who of course should be president, he also knows he doesn't know what he's doing. And he fills in the blanks. And Donald also, and this does show up in his Twitter feeds, there's some clear cognitive decline here, okay? I'm 2 years younger than him. I used to, as a parlor trick as a kid, multiply 4 digits by 4 digits in my head. You give me your 10-digit phone number, I got to write it down. Donald used to speak in coherent paragraphs. I've spoken with him many times where we carried on a conversation, for an hour and a half or 2 hours. But now, it's word salad. It's terrific. It's beautiful. It's beautiful. It's so beautiful. It's so beautiful. He just speaks in adjectives. And unless he's reading, and when he's reading, as you can see, he can't even read right. I mean, after all, I'm just waiting for one of those F-52 fighter jets to fly overhead. So, okay, sir.
Yes, sir. My question has to do with two resources. In this room, there are a lot of people who are in a community that is very supportive of Democrats for the most part.
Yeah.
I'd like to
I'm a
ask
registered Republican.
I'd
Go
like
ahead.
to ask you, what can you speak to about how we should direct our resources to other places, not just money, other places to do that? And the last one has to do with corporate involvement, because
Okay,
that
hold corporate
money.
involvement for a second. Let me do the first part. When you gerrymander, what you try to do is create districts that are about 53, 4, or 5% your party. And then you corral people so that you get 60, 80, if you can, 90% the other party in the district. Well, a 54% margin can be overcome by turning out a vote. So that's why it really matters. You're not going to win every seat. You just need to win enough. Based on historic norms, the Republicans should lose control of the House and the Senate. They may not. But what matters is picking districts. Look at the congressmen who've resigned. Open districts are easy to flip. Ones with current members, they require a lot of effort and a lot of groundwork. So corporate involvement.
Yes, my question though is, we should in this community redirect our resources to those areas that could be flipped.
That's right.
And not spend time in the district or in Bethesda where we got.
If you live in Bethesda,
Now,
Maryland, you need to go across the river here into Virginia, just
someplace
below
else.
the border.
Okay, the last one has to do with corporate involvement. Corporations control a lot of money that drives this. And how can we reach not these corporation directors, but the executives, but the directors of these corporations?
Gotcha. How do we
board
get
of
to the
directors
corporations?
who control the money.
Yeah. Corporations were created to serve us. You have no right to have a corporation. We want corporations. Corporations encourage risk-taking. They're very important. They're very efficient vehicles for wealth. But what we're doing is we've given them property rights, which makes sense because they're property. But then we gave them political rights in a series of decisions leading up to Citizens United. And in Hobby Lobby, we literally gave corporations religious rights. We pray to thee for more profits, Mammon. We need to scale back and recognize corporations are a tool to help us. And the way to do that, lobbies work very well. Look at how Disney changed its policies when people who, if you're a parent, you've paid the Disney tax. The people who pay the Disney tax made it clear that they were going to, make Disney less profitable if it didn't change some of its policies. Nothing wrong with organizing boycotts and going after companies for what they're doing. Look at all the companies that quit running ads with Rush Limbaugh. That's a very effective strategy.
Do you think Donald Trump is smart or stupid? And why, as a follow-on, why would Roy Cohn, who was smart and a difficult person, call him the only genius he ever met?
Donald is not particularly smart.
I didn't
And
think
he's-
so.
And he's not a good negotiator. I've negotiated with him many times, and he is so easy to
So why
manipulate.
would Roy Cohn say that?
I don't know. But Donald is very, different people have different intelligence levels. I did a book for O.J. Simpson while he was awaiting trial. O.J. Simpson couldn't speak the king's English, but when it came to emotional intelligence, figuring out who in a room was powerful and important and mattered, O.J. was off the chart.
Really?
He would know in this room who to sit next to if the lights went out for 15 minutes. It just was astonishing, but in everything else, not so smart. And Donald is like that. He has an area where he's very good at stuff, and he is, after all, let's recognize it. He's a grifter and he's a con artist, but he's the most successful con artist in the history of the world.
Right. Okay.
Ma'am.
Hi, I'm Allie. I'm a junior
Hi,
at
Allie.
Georgetown University. I was just wondering how you think students can get more involved in this administration beyond like letter writing and phone banking, because a lot of the issues aren't on the congressional side and, like you're saying, are more in the executive.
Yeah. Well, college students have played a very important role in changing America. The real reforms in America come from the bottom up. There are lots of college students who went on freedom rides. There were college students who led the fight against the war in Vietnam. And so, you have to organize. The first thing you got to do is you have to organize. And you have to pick something. You can't scattershot hit everything. And then you've got to reach out to other people and sell them a message. You've got to use the techniques of marketing and persuasion to get people to come along. And so get students together and talk about what's an issue we can do something about, get ideas from a lot of people, and then stick to it. When you have a meeting, assign responsibility. With the next meeting, say, did you do what you were supposed to do, and get people to do it, and then reach out and actually act. Don't sit around and have a bull session. Go do things. Whatever they are, act. Thank you.